Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Hope you had a great weekend. I still see conservatives saying that we need to open up our schools, get our kids back in school. Do we? Our schools are terrible. I don't know if you feel like forgotten that over the last year. Our schools are awful, the public schools in America. Let me prove it. Let me prove how bad they really are. You know they're bad. I don't know if it's like, we just want to ignore it or pretend they're not that bad or something, or like, oh yeah, they were pretty bad when I was in school. No, way worse. You knew it was bad, but no one could know it was this bad. This is a story of a student at a high school in Baltimore. His mom thought that he was going to graduate in a couple months, right? He's a high school senior, 17, ready to graduate, go on with his life. Turns out this student has failed 22 classes. He's passed 3. He got a D- in English, so barely, a D+ in fundamentals of art, whatever that is, and a B in health class. That is a grand total of a 0.13 GPA. 0.13. The mom thought he was going to graduate, and he was told he has to go back to freshman year and do the whole thing over again. Now, here's the worst part of that story, as you saw right there. There's 120 kids in his graduating class, 120. He's ranked 62nd. He's right in the middle. That means there's 58 kids in the school, or in the class, who have a lower GPA than 0.13. He's one of the smarter kids. He's one of the high achievers with a 0.13. How can we allow this to continue? Let me be specific. How can Democrats allow this to continue? They're the ones running the show in Baltimore, aren't they? They're the ones who run the show there. They're the ones who run the school district. They're the ones who run the school district in every big city across the country. This is a travesty. This isn't just like, oh yeah, maybe our schools could really do a little bit better. This is like, nothing fails this hard in the whole country. This is an absolute, like, how can anyone look at this and find this acceptable for one more minute? For one more minute, how can you allow these schools to remain open? I'm just trying to think of this person who's gone oblivious to the public school failures their whole life, and they're hearing me say this, and I'm trying to imagine how they're trying to rationalize this in their brain or something. You can't. There's nothing you can say, there's nothing you can think that can excuse this. Nothing in our country fails this hard. Is there anything that can continue to fail this much for generations and get away with it as bad as our public school system? Never drop your kids off at these places ever again. Never drop your kids off at a public school ever again. And I don't want to hear it, we go to a good public school. No, you don't. No, you don't. Oh, my kids are in the advanced classes. No, they're not. They're not going to exist anymore because they're not equitable. Okay, so they're going to get rid of the advanced schools and advanced classes, and then all the curriculum is still created by people up in the state, in the Capitol, who hate your worldview and everything you believe in. Don't drop your kids off of these buildings ever again. And this is nothing new, right? Even in Baltimore. So in 2017, there were 13 Baltimore high schools where not a single student was proficient in math. Not one kid was proficient in math. So it's not like this one kid is like this weird anomaly in Baltimore. Like, who knew the Baltimore schools were so bad? Everyone knew they were this bad, but we keep doing it. 2016, there were 5 Baltimore high schools and 1 Baltimore middle school where not a single student was proficient in reading. That means there are 5 high schools in Baltimore, 5 high schools where there wasn't a single kid proficient in reading or math. Not one. You knew the public schools were bad. Could you imagine they were this bad? I've just got a vision from the person who's watching this. And it's like, oh, Slater, you're overreacting. You're being mean. We need to spend more money. That's what they would say. Just because we're not funding our education. They spend $15,000 a year per student in Baltimore. It's one of the highest in the country. $15,000 a student. Okay, now back to this story specifically. But actually, no, it's not even a specific. It's not just this one kid. There's a lot of hard truths that no one wants to talk about. Who do you put the blame on here? Who do you put the blame on? Actually, let's go back to this story. So here's the boy's mom.
Why would he do 3 more years in school? He didn't fail. The school failed him. The school failed at their job. They failed. That's the problem here. They failed. He didn't deserve that.
Okay. Now, she's right. Clearly, the school's terrible. Like, how could they? See, it's not a mistake. That's one of the problems. People think it's a mistake. It's not a mistake. Passing him from Spanish 1 to Spanish 2, even though he got an F in Spanish 1, right? Passing him on to Algebra 2, even though he failed Algebra 1 for 4 years, right? That's not an oversight. That's not like the code or the algorithm in his school screwed up and they put an A instead of an F, like whoever was data entering. No, this is not an oversight. That's the system. The system says, oh, you can't be mean to kids. You can't hold them back. It's not nice. Don't use red pen to grade tests because it hurts their feelings. That's that mentality. It's the progressive mentality. One teacher saw a problem with this student and reached out to the mom. And the mom doesn't remember it and there was no follow-up and that was the end of it. One! That's the system. That's not an oversight. So the news story for this was the Fox affiliate in Baltimore. They definitely went on to blame the school system and the protocols that are in place to help kids like this, but none of the protocols went into effect and blah, 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 blah. Listen, there's no doubt that these schools are awful and terrible and everyone who works there should be, right? Like it's like the worst, right? But here's what no one really wants to say. No one wants to blame the mom. Now, she seems like a fully functioning person. Right? She has her nails did, she's wearing nice clothes, she's not mentally ill, she's not physically incapacitated, she's a fully functioning person, right? How could she, and I don't just mean her, right? I mean again, that kid right there is ranked 67 in the schools. There's 58 kids who are worse, which means there's 58 moms who are in the same situation. That's just one school. There's entire cities in a country worth of people like this. So I'm not just picking on her. I'm not picking on anyone. I'm not just highlighting her. How could she have not known that her kid was failing literally everything? How could she not have known that her kid was showing up late or didn't show up nearly every single day of the year? She assumed, she goes on in that piece, she says, I assumed my son was doing okay because he kept getting promoted. You never had a conversation about your son, about what's going on with school? Not one time? You never followed up anything? You say the teachers never reached out to you. You never reached out to a teacher? Which leads to the fundamental question. Again, we're asking, whose fault is it? But it leads to this question. Whose job is it to educate your kid? I'm going to put an emphasis on your. Whose job is it to educate your kid? Whose kid is it? Now, this is a very progressive thing. We're getting a little out there here. But progressives, Marxists, they think they don't believe in private property, and they talk openly about private ownership of children. They don't think it's your kids, and they also want you to not think it's your kid. And we all keep outsourcing so much responsibility for our kids onto the state. After a while, you don't think it's your kid. And you start thinking that the school failed you as opposed to you failed your kid. And that's the problem. Whose job is it to educate your kid? And this is for everyone. I'm talking poor single mothers and wealthy white couples and everyone in between. It doesn't matter. So many people think that it's the school who's in charge of educating their kids. And maybe the parents are there as a supplement on the side. Maybe the parents are there from time to time to do their kids' project for them and make the volcano for them. Okay? Or maybe the parents are pick them up, drop them off. Drop them off, pick them up. Parents are the government's shuttle service. But the schools do the raising, the training, the educating, and even the feeding of kids. Now, is this mom a victim of a cultural mindset? Sure, yeah, I'll give you that. But this isn't that hard to realize, is it? That you should have some role in your kid's education. But that's how far gone we are. That's how far gone we are. This is a rant I go on from time to time whenever feeding kids at school comes up and parents can't figure out how to feed their kids if schools aren't in session. What are you talking about? It's the same thing with education. It is natural. Every animal in the animal kingdom feeds their kids. It is natural to feed and care about your kids' education. That's the natural thing, and that has to be trained out of you. Does that make sense? You don't have to be trained to feed your kids, to at least to want to feed your kids. You don't need to be trained to care about your kids' education. That needs to be trained out of you. Right when slavery ended, there were men, former slaves, traveling all over the South looking for their wife and kids so that they could be reunited as a family. They would do anything to be with their family again. And today, we have men who know exactly where their kids are and don't care. We have story after story of slaves, women and children doing everything they could, risking death to read and teach their kids the Bible. And today, the Bible's free for everyone. There's books all over the place. And we don't read, and we don't study the Bible. All of this is at our disposal like never before, and we do nothing with it. It takes a concerted, lasting, intentional effort to get parents to not properly care for their kids. It's unnatural. Or let me put it like this. It's natural to care for your kids' education. It's unnatural to not care. And now the unnatural thing is the normal thing. And I'm sure that mom, her parents didn't care about her education, and her parents didn't care about her education, and on and on and on, right? So yes, she's a victim in that way, I guess. But still, this is the parent's responsibility. The true story is stop sending your kids to these places. Even if it's a good school, the curriculum is set by the state, set by people who hate your worldview. And if the school teaches your kids anything, it teaches your kids to disrespect you, to hate this country, to be racist, to think in terms of race all the time, and teach your kid there's no such thing as gender. So I can't wait, hurry up, let's send our kids back to school. No, do everything you can to get your kids into a private school that aligns with your family values. I don't care if you have to sell everything and live in a trailer down by the river. Do what it takes, because in the secular perspective, it's the most important thing, your kid's education. But we do the easy thing. I'll give you an example of how bad things are coming up next. Have you ever heard of anti-racist math? Because math is racist, you know. That's what your kids are learning. Tell that story next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, is math racist? No is the answer. No, it is not. But the people who teach your kids at public school, and many private schools as well, that's why I always say don't send your kids to a public school. Make sure you send your kids to a private school that aligns with your values. There's an asterisk there because many of these private schools are even worse than the public schools. But many teachers are teaching your kids that math is racist. Something doesn't add up here. That was brutal. Sorry, our producer said do a math pun. Something doesn't add up. I shouldn't have done that, sorry. All right, check this out. This is not some random professor at some no-name college that I found on his Twitter with 100 followers, okay? This is paid for, this is a curriculum paid for by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it's put together by the Lawrence Hall of Science at UC Berkeley, the California Math Project, which is the California Board of Regents, which is the University of California education system, the Association of California School Administrators, and the LA County Office of Education, which means it's the entire state, which means it's the entire country eventually, okay? It is this, as you see right here. It is a new anti-racist math curriculum, okay? A pathway to equitable math instruction, dismantling racism in mathematics instruction, which means math is racist. So I got some nice lines from this. How about this one right here? This is page 64 of the curriculum. The concept of mathematics being purely objective is unequivocally false. So the idea that math is objective is without a doubt, it's unequivocally false. How about that? We're talking 2 + 2 = 4 here. We did a segment on this, a couple months ago. No one believed me. And I said, if you remember, there's 2 kinds of anti-racist math. Anti-racist, so you have anti-racist math where progressivism is infused into the math curriculum. So it would be anti-racist word problems like, let's calculate the amount of land that America stole from Mexico, right? Or this transgender male makes this much money, but this white cisgendered man makes this much money. How much privilege does the white straight man have or whatever, right? Like those like actual math problems, right? So it's infused in the curriculum. And then there's racist math, which is has more of a postmodern bend to it, where they say, what is math? Where 2 + 2, it could equal 5. Now notice they don't say 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, because that's a truth statement. If it doesn't equal something, it's just, it could. It could equal 4, it could equal 5. Who are you to say it doesn't or does? You think I'm joking? I got some more quotes from here. How about this? White supremacy culture shows up in the classroom when the focus is on getting the right answer. Too much focus on the right answer in math class. That's white supremacist of you. Or it's also white supremacist when students are required to show their work. That's a white supremacist value. It's racist. The main goal of this program, they state, is to dismantle racism in mathematics instruction. The kid we talked about in the last segment, who's failed nearly every single class in his high school career, the argument that school and that the woke schools today make is that he failed not because of, well, as we talked about, cultural issues or family problems or anything like that. No. The system's racist. They won't even say that the school system itself is broken. They'll just say the system, like America, is racist. Standards are racist. Objective truth is racist. Merit is racist. Showing up on time is racist. Right? This kid didn't fail. The white patriarchal system oppressed him. I'm not kidding. The anti-racist thing to do is to completely get rid of standards entirely. Not enough black kids are graduating, so instead of helping kids meet the standard, which would require a cultural shift that no one wants to touch, let's just eliminate standards. The chancellor of the California community college system said that the biggest hurdle to a kid graduating high school is algebra. And they literally said, so if you're not a STEM major, science, technology, engineering, math, why even study algebra? That was the head of the California community college system. Why even study algebra? Yeah, you know what? Why even have school? Why do it? What's the point, you know? If you're not going to be an English professor, why even know how to read? Reading's racist. I'm only half kidding. Every time you see a slide where it says white supremacist values, we've gone over this many times before, one of the white supremacist values that they list is worship of the written word. The written word, reading, is racist. This is a quote from Rochelle Gutierrez. She's a professor of education at the University of Washington who's in the forefront of all this nonsense. It says her bio says her specialty is equity issues in mathematics education. She says, I argue for a movement against objects, truth, and knowledge towards a way of being in the world that's guided by first principles mathematics with an X. That's not a typo, that's an X. That's more transgender inclusive math. I want to focus on this line. I argue for a movement against truths. I argue for a movement against truth, says the math teacher. There's no such thing as truth. I hope you're seeing this. I know it's so hard for our brains to comprehend. I said, what are you talking about? How could this be real? It is. There's a Brooklyn College professor of math education. His name's Laurie Rubel. How about this quote? 2 + 2 = 4 reeks of white supremacist patriarchy. These people, these are the professors that teach teachers. These are the professors that make the curriculum. That's what I was talking about a second ago. And you're like, I say you got to get out of public schools. You must take your kid out of public school immediately. Do not send them back to public school, period, under any circumstance. And you're saying, oh, my kids go to a good school. No, they don't. Because they get their curriculum from the state that gets their curriculum from people like this. You can write these, these people off as just a bunch of loons. I'm reading from the curriculum for California schools. Okay, California, if it was its own country, it would be the 6th largest country in the world. Culturally, everything moves from West Coast to East Coast. That's the influence that California has. Everything culturally moves from West to East. So this is a cultural movement in our schools that's moving from West to East. And it's Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation sponsors, so there's a lot of money behind this. This reminds me of a great line from G.K. Chesterton around 1900 or so in England. He wrote this great speech about the BBC, and it's a long story, but he said there's no such thing as truth in society anymore. He was in the very beginnings of this about 100 years ago. And he said, we shall soon be in a world, he's talking about 2021, in which a man may be howled down for saying that 2 and 2 make 4, in which furious party cries will be raised against anybody who says that cows have horns, in which people will persecute the heresy of calling a triangle a 3-sided figure, and hang a man for maddening a mob with the news that grass is green. Persecute the heresy of calling a triangle a 3-sided figure. Who are you to say what a triangle is? What is a triangle anyway, they say. There's a great line from and by great I mean insane. It's from the math curriculum. The title of the page is when it says white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when, and then it has a list of different things. Okay, so white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when, and then one of the reasons is when good math, it's in quotes, good math teaching is considered an antidote for mathematical inequity of Black, Latinx, and multilingual students. Okay, so that's like a ridiculous sentence. Let me translate it for you. If you believe that there's inequity, means inequality of results between Black students and white students, right? There's an inequity in math results, which there is. And you look, based on groups, which is its own problematic issue. But anyway, okay, let's just go with that. Okay, so if you think there's an inequity between Black and white kids in math, and you look at that and you're like, oh, the solution to that is to teach Black kids math, like to do better at teaching Black kids math. Oh, that's white supremacist culture. That's the patriarchy. There's a mathematician at Princeton who we've talked to before. He's wonderful. He's a mathematician at Princeton who studies black holes. This is like, what? He's a genius. He wrote an essay about how horrific all this is. And he said this. He said, there's no such thing as white mathematics. There's no reason to assume, as the activists do, that minority kids are not capable of mathematics or capable of finding, quote, the right answers. It's so offensive when they say that. And there could be no justification for, in the name of equity or anything else, depriving students of the rigorous education that they need to succeed. The real anti-racists, you and me, will stand up and oppose this nonsense. Will we, though? Will we? The way to stand up and oppose it is to get your kids out of these schools, save yourselves, and then fight to save others. I'll end this segment with a line from Rush, not Limbaugh, the band. It's from the song "The Trees." You have to go listen to it; it's amazing. And the song, one of the lines, the whole song is great, but one of the lines is it's about trees being different height. So the maples formed a union and demanded equal rights. The oaks are just too greedy. We will make them give us light. Now there's no more oak oppression, for they passed a noble law, and the trees are all kept equal by hatchet, axe, and saw. Coming up next, we'll get the true story on H.R. 1, how it's called the For the People Act, which is the exact opposite of what it says it is and what the Democrats say it is. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.
during the current legislative session, elected officials in 43 states have already introduced over 250 bills to make it harder for Americans to vote. We cannot let them succeed.
What is Biden talking about? He goes on, he says, we need to pass H.R. 1 because it protects the right to vote, it repairs and strengthens our democracy, and it improves the integrity of our elections. And I'm here to tell you it does none of those things. Actually, Hans von Spakovsky is here to tell you those things. He's from the Heritage Foundation, one of our favorite guests. Mr. Spakovsky, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing just fine. And listen, you pegged it exactly right. That H.R. 1 does the exact opposite of everything the president just said.
It's called the For the People Act, though, Mr. Spakovsky. So isn't it great then if it's for the people? All right, let's run through. I want to figure out how to do this. Maybe we can say what they say it is and then what it does, right?
Right.
So let's talk about voter ID laws. What do they say about voter ID laws?
H.R. 1 would eviscerate any state's voter ID law because it says that states have to allow someone to vote without an ID as long as they sign a form in which they say, yeah, I'm really Tom Smith, which I could easily do in any polling place across the country. When Biden says, oh, states are trying to make it harder to vote, no, states are trying to do things like secure the voting process by, for example, requiring an ID, which is a common sense reform that Americans overwhelmingly support.
So this law would make it illegal for a state to have a voter ID requirement.
In essence, yeah, that's exactly what it would do. A similar change that it makes is, look, if a state is smart, they require a witness signature on an absentee ballot. That's a way of authenticating, making sure it's really the voter who filled out and signed the ballot. Such a witness signature requirement would now be unenforceable. No state could apply a requirement like that if H.R. 1 becomes law.
One should be against all this just because of the federalism issues, let alone the specifics of the law, but that's for another day. So what about illegal immigrants?
Well, this law forces states to implement what's called automatic voter registration. That means they have to use information from state databases like DMV and welfare offices to automatically register those individuals, and federal agencies are also included with that. As you know, there are plenty of people who are not U.S. citizens who are in those kind of databases. So it's pretty clear, even if it's an accident, that people who aren't U.S. citizens are going to get automatically registered. And the sponsors of this legislation obviously know that because they put in a special provision, Mike, a provision that says no alien can be prosecuted because he was automatically registered.
Wow. So the concern was an illegal immigrant, like in California, we have the motor voter law. So you automatically are registered to vote when you get your driver's license, your illegal immigrant driver's license. So they're saying that if an illegal immigrant automatically, against their knowledge, gets registered to vote, they were worried that one of them would be prosecuted for it. So they wrote into the law that they can't be a prosecutor. Wow. Oh man, Hans. Okay. What about same-day voting? Does it say anything about this? I'm just going through the wish, like a Democrat's wish list. So does it say anything about same-day voting?
Yeah, it forces every state to put in same-day voter registration, which means states have to allow you to walk into a polling place on Election Day, register, and immediately vote. Think about this, Mike. Combine that with the fact that they can't ask anybody for an ID. So what does that mean? It means you, Mike Slater, you could walk into any polling place anywhere in the country, say that your name is Tom Smith, they have to let you register, you immediately vote, and they have no way of realizing you're not really the person who's just registered because they can't ask for an ID.
Would their argument be, oh, well, afterwards they'll cross-reference it with the voter rolls to make sure you really were who you say you were? Like, is that the argument?
Well, how are they going to know? If I go into a polling place and I use a false name to immediately register and vote, and then I walk out of the polling place, how are they ever going to know or catch me for doing something like that?
Yeah. No, they wouldn't. Especially if it's public record, at least in California, if you voted in previous elections. So you can just find someone who's never voted and just pretend you're them.
Exactly.
And they wouldn't know either. What does it do with mail-in voting?
Well, first of all, it says that every state has to send an absentee ballot request form to every single registered voter. Every voter has to be given the opportunity to register by vote. If a voter requests an absentee ballot just once, they can be added to a permanent absentee ballot list. So thereafter, they'll be sent a ballot every election. Oh, and by the way, two things. One, states will have to accept absentee ballots for up to 10 days after Election Day. And
Wow.
any state that has banned vote harvesting, in other words, any state that says third-party strangers can't pick up your ballot to deliver it, like campaign staffers or party activists, that's now overridden by H.R. 1. They have to allow third-party strangers, people who potentially have an interest in the outcome of the election, to be able to go to people's homes and pick up their ballots, where, by the way, they're in a great position to try to coerce and pressure voters to vote a particular way.
Yeah, so they're federalizing California election law and the 2020 election, basically. That's what's happening here. Before I ask any big picture questions, is there any other specific that I'm missing?
Well, keep in mind two other things. There's a whole section changing federal campaign laws that really restrict First Amendment activities like political speech and political activity. And for taxpayers, there's a section in there that will now provide public funding for people running for Congress. So you're a taxpayer. Your taxes may be used to fund the political campaigns of candidates who you would never vote for and can't stand.
Wow. Go back to that first one, because someone mentioned that in passing the other day, and I think that's super important. What does this one deal with? The political makeup of the what?
It changes the Federal Election Commission from 6 commissioners to 5 commissioners. That's important because the commission right now has 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. That means it takes 4 votes to go after a candidate, for example, for violating federal campaign finance laws. That means they make a bipartisan decision. By changing it to 5, if one party controls 3 of the 5 seats, they can engage in partisan enforcement of federal campaign laws, which is extremely dangerous. That is not something you want to have happen. And I say that as a former commissioner on the FEC.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What kind of stuff would they go after, that commission? Or could they go after?
Well, for example, this bill vastly expands its jurisdiction to go after nonprofit associations, whether it's the NRA on one side or Planned Parenthood on the other, to force them, for example, to disclose their donors and do things like that, which could endanger their ability to do their work. And this change in the makeup of the FEC, like I said, would allow partisan enforcement. They could decide, if Democrats, for example, controlled the commission, they could decide, well, we're going to go after a Republican group or conservative group because we think they violate the law. But we're not going to go after a liberal group that is engaged in exactly the same kind of violation of the federal statute.
Yeah, so they could make their donor rolls public, which would maybe chill people may not want to donate to them anymore.
Exactly. The whole purpose of that is to really expose those donors to harassment and intimidation.
Intimidate them, yeah, okay, brutal. So H.R. 1 needs 60 votes in the Senate, right? It already passed the House and it needs 60, is that correct?
Yeah, if the Republicans mount a filibuster, it'll take 60 votes to end debate and get a vote on the bill.
Okay, so the question is this worthy, if you're a Democrat, is this worthy of ending the filibuster to jam through?
I don't think it is, but they may believe it so because they view this as a law of cementing their political power. They think this somehow will help them control state legislatures and, frankly, congressional elections for a long time in the future. But they're doing it on an unprincipled basis because, in essence, what this bill does is it makes it easier to cheat and easier to manipulate election results.
Is there any good thing it does? I mean, it's obviously called the For the People Act, and you just heard the president say it protects and repairs and strengthens our democracy and integrity. Does it do any good thing?
I haven't found a single thing in this bill that I think is any good. And I have to tell you, I found it kind of funny hearing that from Joe Biden. You know, he also issued an executive order ordering all these federal agencies to make it easier to register and vote. And, you know, one of the agencies he included in that was the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So his chief concern apparently is making sure that felons who are in federal prisons are able to register and vote as soon as possible.
When is this voted on in the Senate? What's the timeline for this?
We don't know. You know, this went through the House without them holding any hearing. They were in such a hurry to get it through. I'm assuming they'll hold hearings on it in the Senate, so it could be weeks or longer, unless they decide to basically upend Senate procedures and try to go straight to a vote.
Wow. Which again, I could see them thinking this is worth it. This is worth ending the filibuster. It's our last chance. We got 2 years to do what we can do and make sure that we win every election at this point moving forward by changing the rules. Wow, Hans, let's obviously talk again about this. Thank you for your help.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, Hans, from Heritage Foundation. No one's better than Hans on this stuff. Amazing. All right, let's talk with Professor Vincent Racaniello. We'll get the latest with COVID, vaccines, herd immunity, et cetera, coming up next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, it's time for the highlight of the week. Although we do it, I don't know why we're doing it on Mondays. We should do it every Friday, something to look forward to. But it's something to look forward to on the weekend, gets you out of bed on Monday. Professor Vincent Racaniello, he is the professor of virology at Columbia University and the main man behind This Week in Virology, microbe.tv. Hello, sir, how are you?
Good morning, and I have to say, I don't think anyone has ever said I'm a highlight, so thank you so much.
You're telling me people don't bound into your virology class at Columbia and say, the highlight of my week?
Well, they do bound in. Well, not these days, but I do have a lot of students in my class, and they seem to like it, so there you go.
There you go. We do as well. And actually, just to remind everyone, and the reason we first asked you on is because I watched a bunch of your lecture, your intro to virology or whatever the class was, right when this whole thing started back in February. You were gracious enough to put it all on YouTube, and that's what got us started. And I was like, I wonder if the professor would like to talk to us. And we've been doing it every week for a year. I'm so grateful, sir. Everyone wants to know the latest with the vaccines. Obviously, last week we talked, it was the Johnson & Johnson. You said 100 million vaccines in the next 2 months or so, which is great. Anything else you got for us?
There's no new vaccine news except that we continue to roll them out. Everything looks good. More and more Americans are getting vaccinated. And now the goal is to get all adults vaccinated by May, which is terrific. And now at the same time, we have trials ongoing in younger kids, in pregnant women, in immunocompromised patients, all these different groups that need to be vaccinated. So all looking very good.
I read something about September being a date when they thought that enough adults would need to be vaccinated. And now you said by April or by May. So what do you think?
So, yeah, the administration has said we're going to get every adult vaccinated by May. They're helping the companies to ramp up production. And, if that's true, that's great. I've always said the summer is probably going to be the time when most adults. So, if it's the fall, that's great. I think we can start schools in the fall for sure. I think that's a good goal.
You mentioned pregnant women. I know I've asked that a few times, but I got a lot of emails about that one. What's the latest with that? Pregnant women or women who may want to be pregnant sometime soon.
Right. So, as you know, the trials have not included pregnant women so far. Nevertheless, a number of women have become pregnant during the trial. So they were enrolled in a vaccine trial, right? And then they've gotten pregnant. And there have been no issues with those pregnancies so far. And the CDC doesn't officially recommend that pregnant women get vaccinated because they haven't been in the trials. However, if you are pregnant and you're in a certain risk group, like a healthcare worker, you can choose to be vaccinated because there's now enough data from these pregnancies to suggest that vaccinating pregnant women should be fine. And as I said, the trials are ongoing in pregnant women to figure out if it's completely safe. But I think the data look good so far that if you're pregnant, you can get vaccinated. If you want to become pregnant, it should not impact whether you get vaccinated or not. As far as we know, vaccination doesn't prevent you from getting pregnant, or it doesn't impact the pregnancy in any way.
Can you think scientifically as to why an mRNA vaccine could possibly affect the baby in the womb?
Not really. The mRNA is gone in a few days. It's injected into your arm muscle or your shoulder. It does its thing in a few days. The mRNA is gone, and the protein remains. I don't see any reason why it would impact pregnancy. Now, there was a rumor going around months ago suggesting that the spike antibodies that you make might cross-react with the placenta. And that's not true. There's no evidence for that. I mean, the reason we say that is interesting. The placenta depends on its formation by a protein called syncytin that humans got from a retrovirus infection hundreds of thousands of years ago. We kept that protein and used it to make a placenta. It was before humans, obviously. And it's a protein from a virus that is used to make the placenta. Okay, it's a spike from an ancient retrovirus, ancient years and years ago, before there were any humans on Earth. And some animals that didn't have placentas were infected with this virus, and they used the spike protein to make a placenta, and that's a protein called syncytin today. And there's about a 4 amino acid similarity between syncytin and spike of SARS-CoV-2. And some people use that to say, you make antibodies to spike, they're going to react with syncytin. But that's not correct. It's not enough to do that, and there's no evidence for that.
Yeah, if that were true, I think we would have seen that by now then, right? Probably.
Absolutely. Yes.
Do you think COVID, and this is a silly question, I already halfway know the answer because coronavirus has been around for a long time, but do you believe this will be endemic? So first, can you define that for us properly? And what does that mean for us in the years to come, you think?
So endemic is what we call an infection or an agent, a virus, let's say, that is always in the human population. It's never gone, right? So some viruses are endemic to certain parts of the world. For example, dengue viruses are endemic to parts of the world where they have the right mosquito, whereas here in the U.S., it's not endemic because we don't have the right mosquitoes to transmit it. So will SARS-CoV-2 become endemic throughout most of the world? The answer, I believe, is yes. We will never completely get rid of it, I think. I think there will always be some people who are going to be infected, and we'll probably have seasons like flu season. Probably will happen in the winter in temperate climates. We'll have outbreaks of COVID-19 again. Everyone will need to get vaccinated, in the fall to anticipate that. And we may have to change the vaccine every year like we changed the flu vaccine. But I see no reason why it would go away. And, part of the reason is not just because some humans will always be infected, just like they are with flu or with common cold viruses, but animals have been infected. And they may serve as reservoirs. Rodents probably in the wild have become infected. We don't know the extent of that yet, but we need to look at it. Animals on farms and so forth. So I think a lot of non-human animals will also harbor the virus and make it hard for it to disappear.
Interesting. I asked that because, and we all know that everything's about trade-offs, right? Life's all about trade-offs constantly. When are we going to get to a point where we don't have to wear masks anymore? And I use masks as a metaphor, right? We could talk about that specifically, but also just like everything else that comes with it. Because if it's always around, will we always wear masks on airplanes? Will our servers always be wearing masks? Because you could get it. We don't do that with the flu. Some people do, right? And maybe if they think they're sick. But are we always going to be doing these things? And who's going to be the person to say, you know what? It's worth the risk now. Everyone can take their mask off. But let's go to Disneyland.
Well, that's a good question. So as you would probably know, today the CDC just announced that if you're fully vaccinated, you could chill in your house with friends without masks, right? You can have dinner or whatever, although when you go out in public, you should wear a mask. So they're slowly moving to that day where they're going to one day say, you don't need to wear masks in public anymore. And that will happen for sure. I wouldn't be surprised.
I think so.
If it happened this fall. But as you know, and as you said, in some countries, people choose to wear masks to protect themselves. And we may have some of that still happening here. Who knows?
Okay, but so you think that day will come. You don't think we'll get to a point where some people will be saying, oh, well, it's endemic and it could spike again. So we got to keep wearing masks forever.
No. Even if it's endemic, we'll have a vaccine. The numbers will be low enough that we don't have to wear masks. And CDC recognizes that at some point they have to tell people to stop wearing masks. And that will happen. Absolutely.
That's good news. Because people are talking about normal, right? And what normal looks like.
Yeah.
Sir, we have exactly 30 seconds. Do you have a final thought?
So my latest thought has to do with kids, and you asked me about that last time. We didn't have a lot to say about it, but a new article has come out summarizing what we know about kids, and I think it's quite clear that kids can be infected. They develop less disease than adults do. They don't get as sick, although they can still get sick. That is, kids 17 years and younger. They probably have more asymptomatic infections. They don't show signs, so we don't notice them. We don't test them as much. And they probably shed virus for shorter periods of time. And that's why people have thought in the past that they're not infected. But serological surveys have shown they're as infected as anybody else on the planet. They may just be lucky and not get as sick.
Does that mean they can spread it and get other people sick too? Like that hurts schools opening, no?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they can spread it.
Sir, okay, I hate we got to run. Let's start off with that next week, Professor. I appreciate you. Microbe.tv. Everyone go watch the podcast. True story. Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word.